Hi, my name is Logan Zaring.
And I'm Erin Haas.
Today we have a presentation about the LGBTQ community, environmental and cultural factors.
So the media portrayal for this population has gotten better over the last few years, but it's still somewhat inaccurate. This population is as diverse as the general population, so it's really difficult to depict an accurate representation of all these individuals. TV shows such as Orange is the New Black, How to Get Away with Murder, and later seasons of Grey's Anatomy have included LGBTQ characters and even some that are ethnically diverse. Generally, the media portrays these individuals as being overly flamboyant or feminine for gay males, or super masculine as lesbian females. These depictions may apply to some lesbian and gay individuals, but it's not representative of all these individuals. The stereotype contributes to the reinforcement of the heteronormative standard of husband and wife by having lesbian or gay couples with one partner being super feminine and the other being super masculine. In addition, the majority of media representations still lack ethnic diversity for these characters, which makes it difficult for people of color to relate. These inaccuracies can lead to these individuals being misunderstood. The role of family support for this population is significant. Family support was found to be a significant factor in the mental health of these LGBTQ individuals. For LGBTQ individuals with accepting families, it was found that they were 8.4 times less likely to attempt suicide and 6 times less likely to have depressive symptoms. Family rejection was found strongly associated with risky behavior. Individuals with accepting families were 3.4 times less likely to abuse substances and 3.4 times less likely to engage in risky sexual behavior. The role of peers for these individuals is hit or miss. They can either help and be supportive, or they can be super destructive. They can mediate or make it worse. Piggybacking on the family support, one of the articles I used found that biological family support overshadowed chosen family or peer support when it came to mental health. So the role they play is small in comparison to family support. Additionally, another study found that peer support plays a smaller role than family support. Peer victimization has been associated with LGBTQ youth suicidality, but also, in contrast, peer support was significantly associated with lower odds of making a suicide attempt.
The LGBTQ community is a unique population in that the inherent vulnerabilities which they face are not necessarily tied to any one specific factor on the basis of identity, but a multitude of factors such as socioeconomic status, race or ethnicity, gender, and individual health factors like genetics, family history, personal habits such as substance abuse and smoking. These variations can affect the population to higher or lesser degrees, dependent on the individual. While discrimination based on sexual identity continues to exist, any of the above listed factors are as likely to create generational health disparities within the population. Cultural views towards the LGBTQ community are trending in an increasingly positive direction, with more legal protections and acceptance, especially in well-developed countries. However, vulnerabilities will continue to garner further considerations and solutions seeking to address each factor.
In regards to the legal system, views and legal protections are very largely dependent on the attitudes of the population within that region. Within the United States, which runs on a left-to-right political scale, the left-leaning tend to be more accepting and protecting of LGBTQ, whereas the right and right-leaning typically not so much. Quote, more than 8 in 10 Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents say so homosexuality should be accepted, but only 58% of Republicans and Republican leaners say the same, end quote. This does vary among federal and state governments. On a federal level, broad rights exist, including anti-discrimination laws and same-sex marriages, which just got passed by the Supreme Court in 2015. On a state level, specifically Utah does not have laws for adoption non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ parents, LGBTQ inclusive definitions of spouse or partners, or private health insurance non-discrimination laws. Utah criminalizes intentional exposure to and transmission of HIV/AIDS for those who engage in sex work. Potential barriers for this population include political beliefs, religious beliefs, and cultural beliefs. As mentioned in the previous slide, political beliefs play a role in the acceptance of the LGBTQ community. Politics also influence health insurance, which can leave the LGBTQ population uninsured and vulnerable. Religious beliefs also influence how accepted these individuals are. Within the state of Utah, which is primarily the Latter-day Saint religion, the LDS Church does not condone same-sex attraction, but they accept all individuals. However, there are still differing beliefs among the members on whether they accept LGBTQ or not. Cultural beliefs vary due to the United States being a melting pot. However, some cultural attitudes of the older generations still don't believe that same-sex attraction is accepted. There are many regions in the world where LGBTQ individuals are not safe. There are many countries that have anti-gay governments and homophobic laws. Generally, most of Africa and Asia are homophobic, and most of these countries criminalize consensual same-sex interactions. For a majority of these countries, this can be tied to religious beliefs.
In a recent study by the Williams Institute, they examined 39 countries and tried to examine the theoretical connection between economic growth and the inclusion of LGBTQ rights. They found substantial evidence from these select countries that suggest limits to economic inclusion. More specifically, LGBTQ face disproportionate rates of physical, psychological, and structural violence. Workplace and educational discrimination led to higher unemployment and reduced skills and knowledge, which also affects workplace factors. In the United States, access to healthcare is largely tied to an employer benefit package in the form of private insurance, which affects healthcare outcomes. LGBTQ individuals face large barriers due to discriminatory factors. These challenges are only compounded when the self-identifying individual happens to belong to a minority group. Minorities in the U.S. have higher rates of chronic disease and premature deaths compared to white individuals. Nearly 48% of African American individuals have some form of cardiovascular disease, and minority groups are more likely to have disparities in poverty, obesity, and diabetes. The most prominent religions in the United States have generally unfavorable views towards the LGBTQ community. A study by the National Institute of Health examines suicidal behaviors among those with minority sexual identity and religious upbringing. Chronic suicidal thoughts were associated with parental anti-homosexual religious beliefs, and social support seems to be a key element in reducing mental health issues. Most health disparities from the perspective of gender are a result not of genetic factors but socioeconomic variance. Lower socioeconomic status is associated with higher mortality rates, alcohol and substance abuse, mental health disorders, and violence victimization. Women are also more likely to be affected by drug poisoning and overdose deaths associated with the rise of the prescription opioid use. Health disparities exist due to geographical location even outside the context of LGBTQ. For example, in some cities, life expectancy can differ as much as 25 years from one neighborhood to the next. While minority groups are more affected by this phenomenon, the health disparities disappear among racial and ethnic groups that live in similar neighborhoods. Mental health concerns are of particular importance in regard to LGBTQ individuals. Receiving mental health services is difficult due to fear of disclosing sexual identity or lack of resources. This is particularly true in rural areas where resources are limited and cultural views might not be favorable. Telehealth has a potential to play an important role in filling this gap. Groups such as the Trevor Project and GLAAD have many resources specifically for LGBTQ people in this situation. Implicit bias continues to be pervasive, especially dependent on location. Implicit biases come in the form of stereotypes and attitude towards a certain group of people. These biases exist even in places that broadly support LGBTQ rights. Explicit bias considerations include laws and legislation that negatively affect LGBTQ populations from having the same rights and protections as the broader population. Over recent years, progress has been made on this front in the form of legislation allowing LGBTQ to marry, adopt children, and protections from discrimination in the workplace. Attitudes and acceptance of the LGBTQ community is sharply divided depending on country and region. Typically, well-developed countries with robust healthcare systems and social policies are better at addressing needs of this population. Political ideology also plays an extensive role, with left-leaning countries offering broader support than those on the right. Factors such as wealth, level of education, and religiosity are also correlated to attitudes towards LGBTQ communities. Generally, wealthy, highly educated, more secular countries afford more rights and display better acceptance and attitudes towards LGBTQ.